to 5MCE. We are talking with Dallas Jenkins, the director of Resurrection of Gavin Stone. Welcome, Dallas. It's great to see you.
Dallas is also a college buddy of mine.
Yeah, we actually played some basketball together, intramurals. We were called the Choir Boys.
Oh.
We were both in choir together, and people didn't expect us to be able to play basketball when we could also sing. But we surprised a few people, so that was fun.
Tell us a little bit of just the background of you, Dallas, and where this came from.
Well, I was in LA for 10 years making movies, and the reason that I was in Los Angeles was because, I grew up in Chicago, but I didn't believe the church and popular culture, the church and Hollywood could ever work together. When I grew up, the only time you ever heard about church related to a movie was in the form of a boycott. And so I wouldn't have put it in these words at the time, but I've always said the most important message in the world deserves the most influential medium in the world. And the church didn't seem to believe that. I was in LA making movies. It was all going fine. And in 2010, Harvest Bible Chapel in Chicago asked me to come back to Chicago, work there, and make movies through the church. It made sense. So combining my love of the church with my love of films led me here. And then real long story short, Resurrection of Gavin Stone came about. I made a short film called The Ride. It was a Christmas Eve thing that we just did for our church's Christmas Eve service. And it got in the hands of Blumhouse Productions, which is one of the biggest production companies in Hollywood. They loved it. They got it in the hands of WWE, the wrestling company. They loved it. They loved the script that we found, the Resurrection of Gavin Stone. So church in the Midwest, wrestling company, horror film company, all combined to put this movie together.
Is that how Shawn Michaels got involved with this then?
Right. So Shawn Michaels, they were saying, look, if you could find a part for one of our wrestlers, it'd be great. No pressure because we don't want it to be a joke, but could be interesting because our wrestlers are so famous. I said, well, what about Shawn Michaels? I heard he's a Christian. I don't know much about wrestling. And they were like, no. He's way too big. This is his lower budget movie. We've asked him to do movies before. He's always turned us down. And sure enough, the next day they called. They were like, he's into it. He wants to do it. So this is his very first movie. He absolutely loved it. And he actually did a great job.
He did a great job. Yeah. I think you took a different approach with this movie. Tell us the approach that you took with the Resurrection of Gavin Stone.
Well, the main character is an outsider. So the story of setting this movie in a church, telling the story of church and what church is and what it should be, maybe what it is that's different from how people perceive it, both good and bad. I think church is better than sometimes people think, and then sometimes it's worse than sometimes people think.
Right.
But telling the story through the eyes of an outsider was the approach that I thought would allow us to get away with having a strong message, having strong, explicitly Christian content, but not in an intimidating way.
Yep.
Oh, I love it. But it also portrays so real, too. And I think there was a whole gamut of emotions because I think the humor was amazing. But then, there was be moments that I'm in tears at the same time. So you really touched on a lot of those emotions, which I think is so important.
Yeah, there's two things that I think can make a faith-based film, particularly in the comedy genre, feel disconnected to the average from the average person. One is, I think if it's too slapstick, if it's too exaggerated, then that puts the movie instantly into a different genre. And then the reality that takes place also doesn't feel as real. But number two is when you make church people perfect, and when you make...
Because we all are, right?
Right, well, yes, but amongst ourselves, we know the dirty little secret, which is that we're extraordinarily flawed. You guys have been open about that. My wife has written a book about that, called Confessions of a Raging Perfectionist, Learning to be Free, which her freedom came when she finally was willing to be open and say, I suck at a lot of things. So I sometimes, even as a believer, watch Christian films and go, A, this movie's funny, but not on purpose. And B, I don't even recognize some of these people.
It was one of the first faith-based movies that we've often had this conversation where they show that this church service, it's all hymns, pews, they're all packed, and you guys had the comedy, of like the communion and like the just like trying to impress and looking around. I mean, it was so that's real. Yeah.
Right. What would happen if a guy came to church for the first time but was trying to fit in? And so how does he sing the worship songs trying to pretend he knows the words? How does he do communion? All the little things. I mean, that's the scene and how does he dress? He Googles how to dress for church.
What's the main thing you want people to take away from this movie? What would you say?
I love that question. It's twofold. One is I want the church to reevaluate. It's always good to reevaluate whether you think you're doing well or not. how it is we look at outsiders. Are we welcoming without judgment, loving without condition, and forgiving without limit, which are the themes of this movie. Then for the church outsider, as I've mentioned several times, we have heard from anonymous cards at test screenings, from people who found out that I'm the director. I've outright said, I haven't been to church in years. This movie makes me want to come back. And so, we're hoping a lot of faith-based movies ask churchgoers to show up at the theater on Friday night. We believe this movie can get moviegoers to come to church on Sunday morning.
So thank you so much. We appreciate. We look forward to all of your new projects in the future. And until then, God bless.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me on.